Today we'll talk about estimates and sample size. Let's talk about confidence interval for a population proportion. If we look at the formula, you will have the p-hat observed sample proportion that you get from your data minus the margin of error, and the observed sample proportion plus the margin of error will give you an interval for the estimate of your proportion. And the margin of error is given by this formula. Now, if we want to do an example, we will have to use that formula and we'll need to use some tables, and I'll show you some shortcuts for your TI-83 or 84. The first example is when Mendel conducted his famous genetics experiment. One sample of offspring consisted of 428 green peas and 152 yellow peas. So we are talking about two different types. Find the 95% confidence interval estimated of the percentage of yellow peas. Now, if you look at your standard statistics books, the Z alpha over 2, which is in this margin of error formula, can be obtained using your statistics calculator by using the inverse norm. So I will show you how you can get Z alpha over 2 given a percentage of confidence interval. The inverse norm is going to be under distribution. You're going to hit inverse norm, and then you can put this, since it's alpha over 2, 95%, you have 5% totaled up on both sides, so that's 2.5%. That will give you 97.5% all the way from negative infinity to that point. So you put in 0.975, and that will give you the 1.96 number here. Now you can actually take this and put it in your formula and use all these things in there, and then you will get the number 0.03579. Do not round off. Then you're going to put that in your estimate for they are asking for the yellow peas. So it's going to be 152 divided by the total, and that is this number, 0.262. And then you have to subtract the margin of error, and you have to add the margin of error, which will give you this number, 0.226 and 0.298. Now, if you want to do this whole calculation using your TI-83, what you'll need to do is you'll need to push stat, and then you'll need to push tests, and then you're going to pick one prop Z interval. Now, that one is right number A, or the option A, one prop Z interval. You push enter. Now, you have to find out, now we're talking about the yellow peas, so that's going to be however many yellow peas they were talking about, 152, and is your total number. So you can actually let your calculator calculate that, 428 plus 152. And then you have to go down and you have to put your confidence interval estimate, which is 0.95, and then you go to calculate, and you will see that the answer is given in interval notation, which is the same as this one. And usually the books recommend that you take 3 digits, 0.262, 0.226 to 0.298, just like here. Let's go to the next one. Let's assume I'm looking for a confidence interval for a population mean. Again, formula is very similar. You're going to have your population mean, and then this one is your standard, this is your sample mean minus the margin of error, sample mean plus the margin of error, and the margin of error is given with this formula. Now we're assuming that you know the population standard deviation, and you have to use this formula using the z alpha over 2 and the population standard deviation in here. So let's do an example. Let's assume 80 students are randomly selected and they are found to have a mean of 4.8 years to obtain their bachelor's degrees. Assuming a standard deviation of 2.2 years, construct 95% confidence interval estimate for the population mean. Again, similarly, you go to inverse norm since it's 95% confidence interval, and you get that 1.96 number. You plug that in 1.96, and you assume this one is the population standard deviation of 2.2, and you plug that in. And we are talking about 80 students. You get your margin of error, and you subtract and you add your margin of error to your sample mean, which is 4.8 minus that and 4.8 plus that. Now, if you want to do the same thing using the stat test button, what you need to do, let me clear this. You push stat, and now you push tests. Now this time you are going to go get z interval. The z interval is option 7. Push enter. Now you can also enter data. Instead of giving all these statistics, you can actually enter the data, and you'll have to enter your data in L1 or L2, and then say data, and now your calculator will do the same thing. Now sigma is given, and in this case it is 2.2, so enter 2.2. And then they're asking, what is your sample mean? In this case, you know your sample mean is 4.8. And then they're asking, okay, what is the number of data points? That's 80. And then the confidence level, 0.95. And calculate. And as you see, you'll get the same answer, 4.3 to 5.3, 4.3 to 5.3. And that will be your confidence interval for this type of problem. You can also have another type of problem where you have no idea about what the standard deviation is. If that is the case, you're going to use this formula. Again, we are estimating the mu. This time, if you don't know the sigma, you have to use the t distribution, t alpha over 2. And that's not built into your calculator, so you'll have to get the t alpha over 2 from the table in your book. It will say student t, and now you will need the degree of freedom to get that number. So I'm not going to show this in here. You'll get that from the table, but let's assume we have an example. In a study for cocaine use on infants, data were obtained from 190 infants with a birth weight of 2,700 grams with a standard deviation of 645 grams. So these are both sample parameters, sample statistics, 2,700 and 645. And they want you to calculate the 95% confidence interval for the mean. So if you were to do this by hand, you'll have to get the t alpha over 2 from the table and assume degree of freedom 1 less than your number of sample points, and plug that in after you get that number, and you plug in your standard deviation and the number of data points, you get 92 points, and keep all these digits. And then you subtract that from your sample mean and add that to your sample mean. Let's assume I want a shortcut. I go and pick stat, and now you'll go to tests, and this time, since you're doing t-test, you have to go to, t-interval, which is option 8. Push that, and you're entering statistics, and you can also enter data if you want it, and now enter all these parameters that you know. What is the mean? 2,700. And Sx, that's your sample standard deviation. What is that? That is 645. And how many data points we're talking about? 190. And the confidence level is 0.95. calculate. It will take a little longer, but you'll get there. 2608 to 2792 as calculated before. And that concludes the section about calculating confidence intervals. If you want to do the same thing for the standard deviation, you'll have to use your tables. That's not built into your calculator. You can actually download some programs from TI's site, and you can check that out later by going on the internet.